I hope you'll excuse me speaking in English. My German is terrible. I'm feeling the privilege of being in the Austrian Central Bank. Not just the glorious building and great coffee, and even a governor that's quite friendly. But above all, we're in a central bank which embodies the lessons of the 19th century, embodies the learnings of a century of volatility, and the idea of setting up institutions that would consider the future, would anticipate problems, would preempt problems, and then would respond to problems. This is essentially what we created here. And this is what we're looking at when we look at climate change, how to anticipate, preempt and respond, how to better anticipate in a way we've been failing to. This is a European invention. The Riksbank was the first central bank, with the Bank of England being the second. I'll return to that theme because Europe has a very special role to play in the governance around addressing global problems, in my argument. It links this argument about the role and development of central banks to a broader privilege, which is a privilege to be in a Europe of social markets. We have pioneered a particular way of running economies and societies, albeit with some differences across Europe, as you would appreciate. But this concept that we need to support our citizens, this concept that we need to enable enterprise rather than let it free somehow and magically it'll create good for all, which seems to be part of the lunatic dogma of the United States sometimes. And this concept of social infrastructure, of the importance of education for all, of the importance of health for all, of the importance of environment for all. That's why we're here today. These are necessary infrastructures that will allow the enabling of enterprise, the enabling of innovation, the enabling of creating futures for all our citizens, young and old. This is a European project. And then a third thing that relates to that, which is essential to what we're discussing here today, has been this European project to create savings pools. It's a bit like creating central banks. We've created this economic infrastructure of insurance funds, of pension funds. These are regulated, these are supervised, these are guided. But these are huge. And it is one of the incredible things that we've done on this planet in the last 70 years, is to create these large pools of capital, which are relatively underutilised, often utilised in the wrong place. We have the challenge of low returns in one place with opportunities in other areas, such as emerging markets. But nevertheless, at a time when we face an extraordinary challenge, the challenge of addressing climate change, this challenge of addressing a rapid reduction in emissions, this challenge of addressing the impact now certain, unavoidable, as you heard earlier today, of climate impact. And we need vast amounts of capital to be deployed to address this issue. We are incredibly lucky that somehow or other, in our muddledness, we managed to create these pools of capital, and we are now on this planet capital rich in a way that is quite extraordinary. That's an opportunity that the idea of bridging between capital and need is essential for. This is a chart from McKinsey's report about the scale of investment required just to address mitigation globally. One of the interesting things about that is that 2/3 of what they posit is a reordering of existing capital flows. Think about it as changing budgets for water utilities to make sure that they address mitigation issues and adaptation issues when sometimes they might not be doing so. That's a reordering. So it's not all new capital, but there is a high capital component to it. In their case, they're positing about $3.5 trillion a year. A lot of that is what I'd call high capex, low opex investments, such as solar, All the money's up front, but the running costs are tiny. But again, I want to stress, we have no shortage of capital on the planet. We've started creating bridges between that need and that capital. The green bond market that you heard about in the previous session is one of those bridges. We've seen stratospheric growth. It was when we started the climate bonds initiative 15 years ago, there were $2 billion of these globally from the European Investment Bank and the World Bank. Now we're at $6 trillion, US, that is. In fact, we're actually at about 6 trillion euros, but there's a few bonds that we don't count as being sufficiently ambitious, and therefore we screen them out in our tracking of the planet. But, you know, what's a trillion between friends? You get the idea. It's a vast market now. And it is extraordinary, in my case, as an activist, a bit like the members of the European environmental agencies that are in this room, to be talking about capital flows in the trillions, not the billions, not the millions now. Exactly what we needed. 10 years ago, one of the objectives of our work was to change the discussion from small to substantive. We have that on capital flows. We have that in interest by regulators, by governments, by investors. This is now a substantive market. This is a market which has grown way beyond the development bank world that kick-started it. The biggest growth sector has been sovereigns recently, but corporates, banks, and so on have been issuing to this market. Austria has had quite an important market of the last few years. Excuse the numbers at the bottom, they're actually years, with 12 being 2025. Whoa! That is amazing. In the first few months of the year, Austria has issued nearly half of last year's thematic bonds. So we can expect to have significantly increased issuance by the end of the year compared to last year. If you look at the sovereign thematic bonds globally, Austria is up in there. My picture has disappeared. But the square that's unlabelled is Austria. I'm still working my PowerPoint skills, I'm sorry. It was a very significant actor globally. We've got more countries coming to market. There are 67 globally now. China being the most recent country that's issued a green sovereign bond, about 650 billion euros outstanding. It's a market which has led to some opportunities to go in different directions. But the key thing I want to just alert you to is that the regulatory amplification that we've seen on green finance in the last 6 or 7 years owes no small favour to the green bond market. It was the growth of the green bond market that showed governments that there was an opportunity to grow this. They had to start from scratch. It didn't start the other way around. The only place where the green bond market started as a result of government fiat was in China, where the People's Bank of China that I was advising at the time in 2014 said, "Thou shalt not issue a green bond in China until we have the regulation." I can still remember banks that I was speaking to chafing at the bit, saying, we want to issue, but they weren't allowed. Regulation came into force on the 1st of January in 2015, and now China is the world's second largest green bond market, with a taxonomy to boot, which then inspired the work in Europe that we did at the high-level expert group in sustainable finance in 2016-17, including a recommendation for a European taxonomy, and whoa, DG FISMA did it. One of the, by the way, side stories there is that the Sustainable Finance Action Plan of the European Commission is a Brexit dividend. Jonathan Hill, the Commissioner at the time, was continually vetoing any work on sustainable finance. It wasn't until he had to resign that DG FISMA was able to get the opportunity to work on the topic and to promote it. There you go. The unanticipated silver linings of an otherwise difficult divorce. the regulatory measures, the regulatory amplification of green finance have included taxonomy development, which has now gone viral. I think we have 60 countries in the world copying Europe's work on taxonomies. It's not perfect. As one of the other speakers said this morning, I'm a big fan of the simplification agenda. We have made some errors in the development of taxonomy. If you speak to the Austrian post office, they will complain that their electric vehicles can't be included. I'm with them, it is lunatic. These are things that DG FISMA frankly should have fixed up. We had a failure of governance in the work we were doing in Brussels. But we're on the road to fixing that, and look, doesn't matter. It's been incredibly influential, incredibly successful in growing a common language for sustainable finance around the world and encouraging more actors around the world to pursue that common language. Financial markets thrive on standards. Financial markets need boundaries. That's how the taxonomy works. Let's see where the simplification agenda by Valdis Dombrovskis goes the next few months, but we are cautiously optimistic. Of course, the second regulatory amplification, some important, has been transition plans, transition finance. In Europe, this has tended to be seen as a compliance measure. But in our reckoning and our conversations, I've just come back from Japan where I've spent a week talking about transition finance with government, investors and corporations. It's not primarily a compliance issue, it's about fleshing out the opportunities, signalling to investors the opportunities that you're taking advantage of the opportunities coming forward and you're addressing the risks coming forward. In a way, it's just business planning. It should just be business planning. It's just that in the context of the changes we have to face, we are not getting the business planning we need. Why? Well, why do we need this business planning? There are three issues that we have to deal with. I mean, one is clearly there are policy implications for what's going on. Look at the last 20 years where the growth of renewable energy triggered by the introduction of the feed-in tariff in Germany in 2001 and then copied around Europe and then copied by the Chinese from 2006 has now led to dramatically reduced cost per unit of solar in particular and also in wind, and most of the world being free riders on that and getting cheap renewable energy as a result. Fossil fuel is not competitive anymore compared to renewable energy in most parts of the world, unless there are regulatory imposts as places like Indonesia that deliberately discriminate against renewables. That's a policy change. That's an example of the sort of stuff we have to get used to and manage for. We're seeing a similar thing happening with electric vehicles at the moment, where thanks to policy action in China, for energy security reasons, for air pollution reasons, for climate reasons, 50% of all cars sold last year in China were electric. Some of those cars coming through were superb, superb. China will win on quality, not just quantity on this. This is a real problem for our European auto manufacturers. Transition planning, folks, is what we have to do to get ahead of these issues, but those policy changes are now baked in and are going to be happening. There's a second area of risk, which is the risk of climate impact. You heard from our scientists earlier on the kinds of impacts we can expect. This year will be the hottest year in recorded history yet again. This year, more people will die of heat than ever before in human history this coming year. And it'll probably be that again next year. We have to prepare. We need a lot of preparation. Things like Valencia should not be happening. We can prepare for those things if we understand that severity of climate volatility is the new normal. Of course, that will create opportunities as well. It'll create opportunities to better manage risk because we have predictive power. Banks are already washing their mortgage portfolios through climate risk systems. We will need to reconfigure our supply chain to be able to manage volatility like that. It will also create conflict. We need to make sure we are prepared for that, which will create business opportunities. It will create geopolitical windows as well. For example, in Japan, where I've just come from, 83% of all energy is imported by ship. Japan is in the middle of the tension between China and the US. The risk of some form of blockade, possibly more in the South China Sea, is very high. Their only alternative path to continuing to import energy is renewable energy. It is possible. They need a moonshot program. They can do it, and that's what we're talking about. But the same applies to Europe, where we've discovered that importing gas from Russia has been rather vexed. And we've discovered in the last 3 months that importing gas from the USA is not necessarily problem-free in its own right. The US has shown us that they can also be an extraordinarily unreliable partner. Importing from Qatar looks fantastic at the moment, but Netanyahu is Donald Trump's best friend, and he keeps saying, let's bomb Iraq, it'll be fine. Iran, I should say, and so on. We have risks in our fossil fuel supply chains from an energy security issue as well as a climate issue. This is a bridge. We absolutely need to fast-track renewable energy. We need to fast-track it not just within the boundaries of Europe, but in our neighbours. We need a renewable energy zone amongst Northern Africa. Egypt wants to build a DC grid to Europe, as does Tunisia, as does Morocco. They're being stopped by various member state arguments, Athens, France, and so on. We need to sort this out. In fact, we need to start operating as Europe. This is critical. The Russian crisis should force this upon us, and yet we still have not implemented any but a couple of Draghi's proposed reforms, for example. Well, let's see what the new leadership in Germany and the Commission brings here. But Austria is an incredibly influential voice in how we run Europe, an incredibly influential country in building a European economy which can compete successfully against China, against the US, in a way that individual countries in Europe simply cannot. And let me give you one example. I was in a meeting of German industrialists recently. They're complaining, China stole our solar. The outrage, the outrage. Of course, what we never did is create a European market for solar to allow scaling up production facilities quickly across Europe. And I'm saying, are you crazy? China did what we all wanted to do. It's just that we didn't respond in Europe. We didn't adequately think together. It is time to think together. The third area of risk that we might miss out on, fear of missing out, is a big driver in business, is of course the opportunities for all this change. Think electrification times 4. That's what we have to do by 2050. Rethink our food production lines, alternative protein. Critical resources, the opportunities are extraordinary. Resilience is the area we need to be really thinking about, though, now. This is what worries me. Not just infrastructure resilience, not just health resilience, but social resilience. And in this august surrounding of the central bank, let me talk about gender as a resilience activity for 2 reasons. First, we know that some 2/3 of climate deaths happening now are women rather than men for various reasons. They're trapped at home, they don't get a chance to get information, to get out and whatever. We also know that inequality is a direct predictor of fragility in our economies and societies. The more unequal they are, more likely we are to fall over in a crisis. We know that the participation of women in business is a predictor of equality. The more women that get primary education, the more small businesses by women that are started up, and the more equal and able to survive shocks a society can be. But this is the central bank's agenda, because microfinance shows that the default rate amongst small businesses run by women is about 3% in emerging markets. The default rate amongst small businesses run by men is about 20%. 20%. Yes, we drink it, I'm sorry. As a result, if we're looking at financial stability, we are forced to start embracing gender issues. But there are many other issues on the resilience agenda. We've published the resilience taxonomy to further flesh out in detail, 1,400 areas, the work that was started in the European taxonomy. Next, there are new norms coming to play. Climate extremes is a new norm. Prepare, think about it. Watch what you wear in hot climate. Watch what you build as an infrastructure developer. Economic volatility is the new norm. We need guidance to address that. We have new appetites amongst investors for transition finance, for resilience investing, which is low risk investing. It can all be supported with incentives, with central bank measures, with guarantees. But above all, there are new opportunities. And understand this, investing in green is not a haircut. The green bond market shows absolutely equal or better returns. There are opportunities in urban development in emerging markets. There are opportunities in public-private collaboration. We only make this transition, this incredibly important transition that our earlier speakers indicated that we need to do, with close collaboration between capital. We have the capital, but close collaboration between business and corporates who have the solutions, and the public sector, central banks, development banks, and government. Without that, we don't have a future for our children. With that, we can create a future. It'll be a different world, but we can find a future that is sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you.